I'm going to tell you about the first time I was ever cheated on when I was 15 by my first boyfriend, okay? We was in bed about 6 months into the relationship and he was asleep and I see his phone on the side and I was like, do you know what, that looks quite inviting. I don't know how I had so much bravery back then. I would literally never do that now. But I didn't think twice. I grabbed it and I went through it. Maybe it dinged or something to provoke me. I went on his Facebook messages and I see this girl's name. We'll call her Molly. And I was like, fuck, because Molly was his ex-girlfriend and there was an ongoing feud between us. Like, I knew from the moment that I got with him that she hated me because she used to write indirect tweets about me all the time. And, like, he would bitch about her and say she was fucking nuts and all the rest of it. And I believed him because, well, she was. But I believed him strongly and didn't, like, suspect anything about him because I was young, you know, and dumb. But I knew that she was, like, still obsessed with him. And she even used to, like, give him missed calls and, like, text him sometimes. And I'd be like, what the fuck? And he'd be like, I just can't get rid of her. Do you know what I mean? So I literally was, so there's a message from Molly on Facebook Messenger. And I see her name and I'm like, shit the bed. And she's put, I'm off my period now, should I come? And he replied saying, yeah. And she put, I'll text you. And that was the conversation. Could you fucking imagine? And it was dated 3 months ago, like, and that was like 3 months into our relationship. So I was thinking about all what we were doing that day. I went back on my photos and I saw that, like, you know, you put 2 and 2 together and you're like, what the fuck? So I fucking, and I woke him up and I was like, you fucking, threw the phone against the wall and he was just like, what the hell going through my phone, like all that shit. And I was like, shut up. He was like a compulsive liar, so he was just like, I didn't do it, like nothing happened, and he somehow got out of it. I don't know how the fuck how, but anyway, like 3 months after that he had a sleepover with 2 of my friends that were boys. They were more my friends than his, but they'd become friends with him and they had a sleepover and it was a bit of like a crackhead sleepover, like a nitty fest. So they did a few substances and like the next day they all fell out for some reason. So then his 2 friends that were more my friends started texting me and saying, oh Summer, you need to get rid of him because that time with Molly he did actually do it. He told us on the sleepover because when you're on the substances it makes you really honest, doesn't it? So I remember I got the text and I went straight to his house even though he was at work. And when he came home from work I was in his room like hysterical crying. I was like playing like, say something, I'm giving up on you. And I was begging him, I was like, just tell the truth please, I'm begging you. He would not tell the truth. It was compulsive lying. I was like, please, I don't even care at this point. I'll even stay with you if you tell me the truth. And he just would not. And I still stayed with him long enough to have more cheating stories.
Imagine having parents so strict that you decide to hire a hitman to take them out. Jennifer Pan was a young girl born in 1986 in Markham, Ontario. Her parents had fled Vietnam in 1979 and worked hard to provide for their children the opportunities that they never had. Eventually, their hard work paid off and they were able to purchase a large home, nice cars, and accumulated a hefty savings. They disciplined their daughter by enrolling her in piano lessons at the age of 4 and figure skating in elementary school. In high school, she thrived both academically and socially. However, when she tore a ligament in her knee, any hopes of being a professional skater were gone. In 8th grade, Pan started self-harming. In 11th grade, she found solace in a 12th grader named Daniel Wong who she began dating. However, he was forced to transfer to a new school and police found a pound of marijuana in his car. This is when her grades began to slide from A's to B's, but she was still accepted into early admission until she failed calculus her senior year and the college withdrew their offer. Pan started forging her report cards and claimed to still be starting university in the fall. She lied to her father about her transfer status and claimed that she even got $3,000 in his scholarship. He was so proud of his daughter that he bought her a laptop. In the fall, Pan commuted to cafes or Wong's dorm pretending to go to class. She even claimed to have successfully transferred to the University of Toronto in 2006 right on schedule. In 2008, as graduation loomed closer, she told her parents that she was only given 1 ticket and had to give it to her friend as to not exclude one of her parents. She was now supposedly a newfound graduate and told her parents that she was volunteering at a hospital in Toronto. Her parents grew suspicious due to the lack of uniform or ID badge. They decided to follow her to work one day and she was finally exposed. She had her phone and laptop confiscated and was forbidden from dating Wong. Over the next 2 years, she worked hard and regained her parents' trust, having her phone privileges restored. She was now 24 years old. She had never been drunk or gone out dancing. However, Daniel Wong and Jennifer reconnected. This is when he provided her with a spare phone, the same one she used to ask him to help her stage a robbery to kill her parents. Wong introduced her to an underworld friend named Lenford Crawford. After exchanging a series of texts, Pan agreed to pay Crawford $10,000 out of her eventual inheritance to take her parents out. He prepared to scope out her neighborhood on Halloween 2010. Kids in costumes streaming up and down the street provided the perfect cover. A week later, on November 8th, he texted Pan after work, okay, will be game time. Pan's father was asleep in bed and her mother was downstairs reading. Her younger brother was studying engineering at McMaster University and thankfully wasn't home. She said goodnight to her mother and unlocked the front door before going upstairs. At 10:02 p.m., she turned on the lights in the upstairs study. 3 minutes later, Crawford and 2 others entered the home. Crime Fanatic Freddy Part 2. Imagine having parents so strict that you decide to hire a hitman to take them out. Jennifer Pan asked her boyfriend Daniel Wong to help her stage a robbery to kill her parents. With the help of 3 others, the plan was set in motion and the men entered the house around 10 p.m. on November 8, 2010. They were all carrying guns and one pointed at Jennifer's mother while another ran upstairs, pointing the gun at her father's face and directed him out of bed, down the stairs into the living room. Upstairs, Jennifer was confronted outside of her bedroom. According to her, he tied her arms behind her using a shoelace and directed her back inside where she handed him over $2,500 in cash, then to her parents' room where he located another $1,100 in her mother's nightstand, finally leading her to the kitchen for her mother's wallet. Her parents were talking to each other in Cantonese, wondering how the men got inside their house. The men asked them where the money was. After her father said he only had $60 in his wallet, the men called him a liar and pistol whipped him in the back of the head. Pan's mother started crying and pleading with them not to hurt their daughter. They replied not to worry and that they wouldn't. 2 of the men took Pan's parents to the basement, wrapped their heads in blankets and shot them. Pan's father was shot in the shoulder and then the head and slumped over. Her mother was shot 3 times in the head and died instantly. Pan somehow managed to reach her phone and dial 911, crying for help on the phone. However, the unexpected happens while she's on the call. Her father gains consciousness, covered in blood with his dead wife's body next to him, and crawled upstairs to the main floor. He can be heard in the background moaning. Pan yells down that she's calling 911. Her father stumbled outside, screaming wildly, and encountered his startled neighbor who was about to leave for work in the driveway next door. The neighbor also called 911. Minutes later, police arrived and Han was rushed to the nearby hospital and then airlifted to Sunnybrook. Jennifer Pan was interviewed at 3 in the morning and she told them the story that she had come up with. The more they interviewed her, the more holes began popping up in her story. If it was a home invasion, why were the keys to the Lexus untouched? And how did they get in so easily? Eventually, they got Pan to admit that she was part of the crime. She later tried to convince the jury that she ordered the hit but changed her mind and wanted nothing to do with it, but they found her guilty of first-degree murder. She received 2 life sentences with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The men who helped her got the same sentence. Her remaining family, including her father and brother, cut off all contact with her and both suffer from depression. Imagine the man that your parents hired to work on their house ends up being the same one who kidnaps you in the middle of the night. In the fall of 2001, a young girl named Elizabeth and her mother Lois came across a clean-shaven panhandler in downtown Salt Lake City. Lois hands the man who goes by Emmanuel $5 and tells him that he can earn more by working on the family's roof. He gladly accepts this offer. Fast forward to one summer night on June 5th, 2002. Elizabeth, who is only 14 at this time, is jolted awake in the early morning hours by a knife pressed to her throat and a voice ordering her out of bed. Her younger sister, Mary Catherine, is also awakened but remains motionless during the kidnapping. Elizabeth instantly recognizes him as Emmanuel, who is really a man named Brian David Mitchell. She's then forced on a grueling hike up the foothills behind her home until they reach a campsite where they're married by Mitchell's wife and accomplice, Wanda Barzy. 2 hours after the kidnapping, Mary Catherine, who was only 9 at the time, finally rushes to her parents' room to inform them what happened. She was terrified and frozen in fear, thinking that the man would come back for her if she moved. Mary Catherine wakes up her parents and says, "Elizabeth is gone. You won't find her. A man came and took her, and he had a gun." Elizabeth's parents shot up instantly to check the house before realizing what Mary Catherine said was true and calling the police. While her parents were frantically looking for her, Elizabeth was at a campsite where the abuse started early on. Over the next 9 months, Elizabeth would be assaulted every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, and tortured in other ways like starvation. She recalls being at the bottom and thinking that it couldn't get any worse, but being proven wrong every time she had that thought. She wondered to herself if her family would still even love her or want her if they found out what this man had done to her. In July, Elizabeth is forced to tell Mitchell about her family and mentions her 15-year-old cousin. He becomes interested in making her his next wife and attempts to abduct her the same way that he did with Elizabeth, but is not successful. A couple months later in September, they take Elizabeth to San Diego, moving between campsites and eating at homeless shelters. Elizabeth is forced to wear a veil and no one recognizes her in the public. On October 12th, Mary Catherine thumbs through Guinness Book of World Records coming to the page of a muscular woman. This is when she suddenly remembers a homeless handyman who helped fix the roof the previous year, his voice identical to the one that ordered her sister out of the room on the traumatic night in June. In February 2003, after clashing with authorities over the issue, the Smart family goes public with a sketch of Emmanuel. This is when people start coming forward and claiming to recognize this man. Elizabeth knew that her only chance at freedom was going back to Utah where her family was. She told Mitchell, who was a self-proclaimed pastor with strong religious views, that she felt that God wanted them to return to Utah. After some prayer, Mitchell ultimately agreed with Smart and was determined to hitchhike back to Utah. This is when Elizabeth had a little bit more hope. Crime Fanatic Friday Part 2, The Kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart. As they walked through the streets going to different stores, Elizabeth was screaming inside of her mind to everyone who passed. "Look at me, look at my eyes, don't any of you recognize me?" But everyone just walked by. Mitchell told them that they were heading back to the campsite, but along the way they came across a party house. There was lots of music, alcohol, and people inside. While inside, Mitchell starts preaching and leaves Elizabeth's side. A man leans into Elizabeth and starts talking to her, but Mitchell quickly is at her side again, anxious to keep her under his control. They make it back to the campsite where Mitchell is intoxicated and passes out. The next morning, he tells Barzy and Elizabeth that the Lord wants them to walk among the people freely and they'll be protected from any danger. Though he concealed her identity with a veil, he failed to conceal his own face. From the sketches that the Smart family released of him that was featured on America's Most Wanted, he was instantly recognized. Upon returning to Utah, at least 2 different couples spotted Smart and her kidnappers. Mitchell had taken them to the public library to do some research on where they were headed in the winter. As soon as they entered, Elizabeth noticed a man staring at her, then getting up and making a phone call. Mitchell and Barzy were looking at maps in California until he decided that San Diego was going to be their new home. That's when Elizabeth looked up to see a man approaching them. He pulled out a badge and told Mitchell that they had received a few calls about the girl in the veil and needed to confirm that this was not a missing girl. Barzy put her hand on Elizabeth's leg leg, digging her nails into her thigh to keep her quiet. Mitchell told the officer that she's his daughter and he can't remove the veil because it's forbidden in their religion. A little back and forth and the officer ran out of questions and left. She didn't speak up out of fear and everything that was running through her mind. Some time passes and it became clear that Mitchell was afraid of being found out. One night as they're traveling, he tells Elizabeth that he's going to keep her at the campsite forever as it's too dangerous to bring her around the city. As they're walking, a police car approaches them. Then another one joins. The officers get out and start asking Elizabeth for her name and where she's from, but she's terrified and says nothing. Mitchell is answering for her, but the officer realizes that she's afraid and won't say anything. He gently puts his hand on her shoulder and asks her if she's Elizabeth Smart. He tells her that her family misses her and has been looking for her. They love her and they want her back home. Finally, with this reassurance, she says, "I am Elizabeth." She's joyfully reunited with her family and Mitchell and Barzy are taken away. Barzy and Mitchell are both indicted on federal charges. In May 2010, Barzy receives a 15-year sentence. That following year, in May 2011, Mitchell is sentenced to life in prison. Elizabeth got married in 2012 and has children of her own now. She's released 2 books about her experience and healing.